Chapter 1. Meeting at the Edge of the World, New York, a city where every day is a test and every evening is an opportunity for a new beginning. It was the heart of the world, but sometimes it seemed that in this endless stream of people and lights, you could lose your soul. Michelle was one of those who lived in this rhythm. At 33, she managed to build a successful career in one of the leading advertising companies in the city. She was goal-oriented, determined, and used to the fact that her life was always under control. She always knew what she wanted: a career, independence, and never allowed herself to be vulnerable, especially in relationships. But something was missing. Her life lacked what she thought did not exist in this city: true love. She almost resigned herself to the fact that her life would be filled with career successes, but not loved ones. That evening when they met, she could not even imagine that her world would change. A party thrown by an old friend was where it all began. Michelle was the center of the conversation, but her gaze accidentally crossed with the eyes of a man standing by the window, a glass of wine in his hand. He was different from the others. That look, calm and confident, caught her attention. Was he on a spree? Was he one of those millionaires who liked to be the center of attention? He didn't look like a typical New York businessman. His easy nonchalance and demeanor were different from what she saw around her. She approached him, and his eyes, surprisingly, met hers not with mild interest, but with real understanding. "You look like you want to run away from here," he said, his voice deep and slightly mocking. "I guess I'm just tired of everything being so superficial," she replied, not expecting her words to find a response. "Interesting," he said, smiling. "I'm James. And you?" "Michelle," she replied, surprised that this conversation had been so easy. "It's nice to meet you." He raised his glass to his lips, looking at her carefully. It seemed he saw more in her eyes than just the mask of confidence she had so carefully constructed. He saw her vulnerability, her doubts. It made her feel strange. Chapter 2. Spark and Attraction. For the first few weeks after they met, James and Michelle continued to exchange short messages. It all started with small talk about work and life in the city, but soon these conversations became more personal. He was attentive and sensitive to her needs, but there was always a slight insistence in his words which, in a strange way, attracted her. She was used to being independent. When meeting with friends, she often heard advice not to date men like James. He had a reputation for being a slightly reserved but charismatic man who rarely stayed in one place for long. However, Michelle could not shake the feeling that there was something more to him than just a casual acquaintance. He understood her hidden experiences. He knew how to make her feel important and interesting. He did not try to win her over right away. His approach was slow but relentless, and at some point it made her vulnerable. One day, when they met for dinner at a restaurant, he said, "I want you to do something you don't usually do." Michelle raised an eyebrow, her gaze growing wary. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I want you to let go of control just for one night," he said, his voice quiet but determined. "Trust me." The words struck a chord with her. She, always confident in herself and her independence, suddenly felt her world begin to unravel. Why did he want her to let go of control? Why was it suddenly so important? She glanced at him, noticing how he was watching her reaction. At first, she didn't like the idea, but then something inside her whispered, "Try it." "Okay," she said, not sure if her decision was the right one. Jake chuckled. His eyes were softer, but they still held the same confidence. He wasn't rushing things, but he felt she needed to let go of that control a little to see how her life could change. Chapter 3. On the Edge of Control. The day that followed that promise was the moment when Michelle first felt her world begin to change. James took his time with her overtures, slowly making her feel how nice it was to be able to let someone else take charge. They met in his apartment, which was decorated in a minimalist style, without unnecessary details, but with a special emphasis on an atmosphere of comfort and harmony. James offered her some wine, and they continued talking about life. "I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do," he said, his voice calm. "But I want you to feel what it's like to be on the side where you don't have to make decisions, where you can just be." Michelle couldn't understand why she was so attracted to this approach. It was something new, but there was something important about it. James gently guided her into a chair, touching her shoulder and making her feel safe. "You don't decide anything today," he said with a small smile. "You let me lead." She felt her heart begin to beat faster. It was unexpected, so different from her usual state that her thoughts were confused. She saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. His concern was not to control her, but to give her space to relax and not think about what would happen next. Chapter 4. Trust and Vulnerability. That evening was a turning point in their relationship. For the first time, Michelle allowed herself to be not the leader, but simply a woman trusting a man. She felt her inner tension begin to release. James did not push, did not command. He simply invited her to allow herself to rest, to let go of control and to experience this moment. They sat next to each other, and he said something to her about life, about people, about meaning. He spoke softly, sometimes pausing to give her space to think. And gradually, in that moment of silence, she realized that allowing yourself to be vulnerable is not weakness. It is a strength that requires courage. Michelle noticed that with each new step in their relationship, she felt more and more liberated and confident. James did not try to dominate her. On the contrary, he helped her see her strength through acceptance and trust. Chapter 5. Exploring Boundaries. A few weeks had passed since Michelle had decided to trust James. Each time they were together, her world became a little more peaceful. She noticed that her need for control was gradually weakening, but at the same time, another feeling was growing. A feeling that in his presence, she could be herself without any masks. One day, after they had spent the day outside walking through Central Park, James invited her to his house. Michelle immediately felt his eyes, full of interest and slight insistence, catch hers. "I thought you wanted to talk about letting me lead, Michelle," he said quietly as they stood in the hallway of his apartment. He knew that it turned her on, and he sensed that she was ready for the next step. Michelle felt her heart flutter at his words and immediately knew that something was changing between them. She couldn't explain why she was agreeing, but his gentle assurance gave her a sense of security she hadn't felt before. "I'm ready," she said, her voice a little quieter than usual, but sure. Her fingers slid over the doorknob, and something inside her twitched softly as she allowed herself to step over a line she had once thought insurmountable. Chapter 6. Space for Tenderness. Once they were in his apartment, James offered her a drink without rushing, but he didn't insist. Michelle noticed how he carefully monitored her mood without trying to force the issue. It was exactly the kind of behavior that fascinated her. "You know, Michelle, there's something amazing about the way you hide your vulnerability," he said as they sat next to each other on the couch. She noticed how his fingers barely touched her hand and how she couldn't take her eyes off his confident movements. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying not to sound confused. "You're strong, Michelle," he said, his voice soft but serious. "But you often hide your softness. You try too hard to be in control." She nodded, acknowledging that he was right. But now, in his presence, it began to seem like less of an issue. He ran his hand gently down her cheek, making her heart beat faster. His touch was so soft, but there was confidence in it. He didn't demand anything from her. He was just there, ready to show her how it could be different. "Let's try this," James suggested quietly, his eyes meeting hers again. He knew she wasn't ready to jump into this, but her steps were becoming more confident. Her breathing quickened as she felt his lips barely touch her neck. He was gentle, but there was some hidden power in it that drew her in. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was a moment of deep trust when she allowed herself to let go of control and just feel. "You can trust me, Michelle," he whispered, and her body responded to his words. It was more than just desire. It was a feeling that she could be vulnerable and still feel strong. Chapter 7. Crossing the Boundary. A few days later, when they met again, Michelle was ready to explore her vulnerability even further. James seemed to sense her readiness, but he was slow, but his confidence that she was ready for the next step was clear. They had dinner at his apartment. That was the night she couldn't hold back any longer. She felt her desire to be near him growing, as if she was drawn to closer contact. After dinner, James invited her to walk around the apartment. He took her hand gently but took his time, enjoying the way her skin responded to his touch. "Michelle," he said as they stood in the center of the room, a soft expression filling his eyes. "I want you to feel like you have the opportunity to be yourself without trying to be everything at once." Her breath hitched as she felt his closeness. Michelle noticed her body responding to his words, and she realized that she was actually ready for more. Her hand slid lightly over his chest, and then there was something new in his eyes, not just interest, but a desire to be in his power, but not in the way she had previously imagined. needed. It was trust, her ability to surrender in his hands, knowing that he would not force her to do anything she did not want. "Do you trust me?" His voice was light, but there was some insistence in it that only added to the intrigue. Michelle took a deep breath and, restraining herself a little, whispered, "Yes, I trust you." He moved closer, and their lips met. It was a moment when their mutual attraction became something more than just physical attraction. It was a complete feeling of mutual respect and understanding. He didn't rush her, but despite this, she felt her body responding to his every touch. Chapter 8. Allowing yourself to be with each passing day, their relationship became more open, sincere, and deep. Michelle began to realize that her desire to be in control was not only a way to protect herself from pain, but also a mechanism that prevented her from living a real life. She was discovering a new world where she could be weak without losing her strength. Jake, in turn, was not only her partner in these moments of trust, but also supported her when she decided to allow herself to be herself. He never pressured her, but always offered a new perspective. One day, sitting on the terrace, he took her hand and said, "You can be weak, and I will be there. You can be strong, and I will be there. Either way, you are not alone." These words were a revelation to her. Rachel realized that her inner world no longer needed protection. She learned to let go of control and allow herself to be a person who can be vulnerable and trusting.